Okay, so let's get right into this. We're going to unpack an incredibly complicated story, and it all starts with a single moment, a flashpoint that truly sent shockwaves around the globe.
So, picture this. It's the first few days of 2026, and headlines just explode. We're talking about the biggest U.S. military move in Latin America in decades. Reports are flooding in. U.S. forces are on the ground, and they've apparently captured President Maduro. The whole world was just left scrambling, asking, what on earth just happened? And yeah, that is the central mystery we're going to unravel today. How does a nation that is literally sitting on top of the largest oil reserves on the planet, how does it collapse so completely that it becomes the stage for a foreign military intervention? To really get it, we've got to go back. We have to rewind the clock. Right, and this is the most crucial part to understand. This collapse did not happen overnight. Not at all. This was a slow-motion catastrophe, a train wreck that was decades in the making. It wasn't one single bad decision, but a whole series of them that just hollowed out the entire country from the inside. Let's just try to wrap our heads around this number for a second. 298 billion barrels. That is the amount of proven oil reserves under Venezuela's soil. That's more than Saudi Arabia, more than anyone else. This black gold was supposed to be a one-way ticket to unimaginable prosperity. But instead, it became a tragic, textbook example of something called the resource curse. That's where having all this natural wealth somehow, paradoxically, leads to economic disaster. So this timeline here, this is where you can really see the dominoes start to fall. It starts back in '99. Hugo Chavez gets elected and basically turns the state oil company, PDVSA, into his personal piggy bank for social programs. Then, in 2002, after a big strike, he fires almost 20,000 of its most experienced employees, just guts the company of its technical know-how. So by the time Maduro takes over in 2013, the whole foundation is already rotten. And then, bam, 2014, global oil prices crash, and the entire house of cards comes tumbling down. And here's what that mismanagement actually looks like. This chart is just devastating. Back in its heyday, Venezuela was pumping out 3.5 million barrels of oil every single day. But all that corruption and lack of investment caused production to just plummet down to around 1 million barrels. And think about this. Oil made up 94% of the country's export income. So this collapse, it's like they just turned off the money tap for the entire economy. You know, this isn't just a story about economics or barrels of oil. It's a profoundly human one. And this number, 8 million, it's just staggering. That's how many people have fled Venezuela. It is the second largest refugee crisis in the entire world. A massive, heartbreaking exodus of people just trying to escape poverty, hunger, and a complete breakdown of society. And of course, a collapse on this scale doesn't happen in a vacuum. The country's internal crisis made it incredibly vulnerable. It basically turned Venezuela into a flashpoint for global powers, transforming a national tragedy into a pawn in a new great power game. So how did the Maduro regime manage to hang on for so long? Well, he had some very powerful friends. You can basically break it down like this. China played the role of the banker. We're talking over $105 billion in loans, a lot of it in exchange for future oil shipments. And Russia? They acted as the bodyguard, supplying military gear and, this is key, using their veto power at the UN to protect Maduro from any real international pressure. And this chart really just drives home how absolutely critical China became. As the US and others tried to squeeze Venezuela with sanctions, China stepped right in. By 2023, they were buying up about 70% of all of Venezuela's crude oil. This wasn't just business, it was an economic lifeline. It's what allowed Maduro's government to survive when so many thought it was about to fall. Okay, so all of that brings us right back to where we started, the intervention itself. And wow, did the world split on this one. You immediately had two camps with two completely different ways of seeing the exact same event. You really had two completely different stories being told. On one side, the US and its allies made their case. They said this was about restoring democracy after a totally fraudulent election in 2024. It was about addressing crimes against humanity and fighting state-sponsored drug trafficking. But on the other side, critics were shouting that this was a blatant violation of international law, an attack on sovereignty. They pointed to the long, messy history of US interventions in Latin America and argued that American sanctions had actually made the humanitarian crisis a whole lot worse. And look, the opposition wasn't just coming from the usual rivals like China and Russia. This quote right here from Brazil's President Lula da Silva, that's huge. It shows just how strong the condemnation was from key partners in the region. For many in Latin America, this didn't feel like a mission to save democracy. It felt like a throwback to an ugly era of American imperialism in its own backyard.
So, with the country at this massive crossroads, what happens now? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The situation is incredibly fragile, and right now, experts are basically looking at three main paths forward, each with its own pretty sobering probability.
All right, let's walk through these. The worst case scenario, and there's a pretty significant 30 to 35% chance of this happening, is that the country slides into a long, drawn-out civil war and becomes a totally failed state, kind of like Libya. The best case? A stable, democratic transition and a slow economic recovery. Unfortunately, that's seen as the least likely, with only a 15 to 20% chance. So what's most likely? Well, analysts say it's not a clean victory for anyone. Instead, it's a messy political stalemate, where the economy just kind of bumps along at the bottom, and global powers keep fighting for influence over a broken nation.
And that leaves us with this final, really crucial question that goes way beyond Venezuela. It's something that forces us to think about the real human cost of these geopolitical chess games. Because when the fight is over a nation's resources, the answer to who pays the price is almost always the same. It's the people.